Hi friends, Mindy here. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be working in my Illuminated Scripture Journal. This is the book of Hebrews. I am focusing on chapter 12, verse 1. I'm starting off over here on the right side. I'm going to be adding some vintage book paper and some vintage hymnal pages. So I'm starting off with some Tim Holtz collage medium. Mine is basically dried and of no good. So I'm going to switch over here in just a second to some matte medium. So you could use gel medium, you could use even clear gesso, but I like matte medium. So I'm just adding a layer behind the paper, and then I'm going to stick the paper down and then add a layer over the top, which will help me be able to blend some colors and things later on. So you can see I'm just going to go back and forth. I do have a couple different hymnals that I'm using here. And I like them because they have different patinas and the size of the notes and things is different as well. And you can see I'm doing them upside down, sideways. It doesn't really matter because it's all going to be in the background. And I just like having it go all different directions. So I'm also going to add this is some antique paper from a book of sermons, a French book of sermons. And it's from like the 1800s. I love this paper, and so it just has a great texture. So I'm going to add a little bit of here. Unfortunately, a lot of this actually ends up getting covered up in the end, but that's okay because I know it's there. I glued everything down. I trimmed off the edges here, and then you'll kind of see what this looks like now that everything has been covered. I always kind of like to work off the edge and then trim it down. I just find it easier to do. So you can kind of see where we're at here. And I know it's very busy, and that's okay because like I said, a lot of this is going to get covered up. So I am moving on to adding some color. So I'm starting off with adding some gesso wash. I just keep this in an old gesso bottle. It's just gesso mixed with water, so it's nice and transparent, but I want to add some color to it. So I'm starting off with some Distress Oxide spray in tumbled glass, and I'm going to spray this right into what I have going on the page. So it's pretty much dry from the glue part of this, the matte medium, but then I'm going to be adding this gesso wash over the top, and then I'm just taking a paintbrush and basically mixing that gesso wash in with that Distress Oxide spray, and I'm going to kind of start adding a layer of this all over this entire page. It's not quite the color and intensity that I want, so this is going to be kind of a process of adding layers and just kind of going back and forth, but you can see I'm going to add a little bit more of that tumbled glass up there in the top left and down in the bottom right. I just want a couple areas to have a little bit more intensity, and I will add some extras, around as well. And then adding a little bit more, just felt like I needed a little bit more blue. And then I wanted to come in with vintage photo. I really like this combination for kind of, vintage looking pages. And so, but you can see that my vintage photo just sprays crazy. And so it's very speckly. So I'm coming back in with my paintbrush to just kind of smooth everything out. And I'm trying not to mix the colors too much at this point. I don't want to make mud necessarily. I do want them to blend together though. So I'm just coming through here with my paintbrush. There's even some areas where I'm just starting to pull some of that color up. And then I will kind of go back in, add some more blue to really make sure that I have the blue in there that I want. You can kind of see it, but I want it to stand out a little bit more. So I'm just blending everything together. I'm going to come back in, add some more spray back in those same areas. And I started off with my paintbrush. It's just not doing what I want. So I'm going to go to my fingers, which is actually my favorite way of painting for some reason. And I am just going to start now kind of going back and forth and just to get to the look that I want. So this is what it looks like after it has been dried. And I am going to pull out this herringbone stencil. And I love this stencil. I'm using some texture paste. This is actually light and fluffy modeling paste from the Crafters Workshop. And this stencil is from Creative Worship Stamps. And so I am starting off just adding this again, just in a few areas. So again, top left, bottom right, trying to keep that diagonal situation happening. And I'm doing a very thin coat of this because I want it to soak up some of that oxide color that's underneath it. And it will, especially if you keep a nice thin coat of it. And so, I'm just making, I want to make sure that I have good coverage, but, I also want to make sure it's nice and thin. And I'm going to go add this in a couple of different places. So of course I dropped my stencil right in there, but if you just are, things happen. It's okay. It didn't really hurt it. And then I'm going to add just a little bit more, again, just using the back of my palette knife here and adding a little bit up in the top right hand corner. I just wanted a little bit more, and you can see I'm kind of smushing the edges around. I'm going to add a little bit over here on the left as well. I don't want to have a really harsh edge, even though I only stenciled a part of the actual image. I still want it to be, I want it to kind of blur into the background. So I'm taking that palette knife and just smoothing out those edges. And I'm actually going to take my palette knife and add a little bit of the texture paste just by itself and not through the stencil in some other areas, just to really add some different kinds of texture. And it just has this nice smooth look, and it will soak up the color in a different way as well. And so I was just like having all of those differences. So you can see me, we're just going to go back through here and really just blend out those edges into the page. I just think that it helps, especially when you're not stenciling the whole entire page and you want to keep that distressed look. It kind of just helps everything blend together. So here's where I'm going in with just a little bit on the back of my knife and adding just random little sections of it, because I just really like all of the texture that gives. So I'm going to set that off to dry while I go wash my stencil and do all the things. And now I'm coming back in now that everything is nice and dry. And this is Texture Tiles 12. I'm using a little speckly one and some archival ink and ground espresso, and I'm just stamping right over the top of everything. You can see I don't have it on a block because I really want a very random stamping of all of this, and I'm stamping over the texture paste. I'm stamping in the background. I'm just stamping everywhere I feel like stamping, just to add some color and some more interest there in the background. And then I am going to go around the edge of the page with that same archival ink in ground espresso as well, just to kind of define the page a little bit. And then I have this page. This is actually something I created a while back. It's the Vintage Ledger stamp, and I stamped it over some really thin old scrapbook paper that I had. I just liked the background of it, and so I created that a while back. So I'm just going to use that today. And I also want to create a little label on the side, and so I have used the tabs, what's it called? Tabs, Tickets, and More die set to cut out this label. That I love this one because it will fold in half. And so I really like just the dimension that gives it. And I'm using the Vintage Labels stamp set, and I stamped the word important on there. And then I'm going to ink this up and make this look nice and old. I also should mention I did add that piece of craft cardstock in the background. It's slightly larger than my page here, than my Vintage Ledger page here. And I distressed it, ripped it, added ink to it. And now on this ledger, I'm adding some of these vintage label stamps. And so I did the little note this up there in the top left-hand corner, and then the number up in the right-hand corner. I just thought that would be a lot of fun. And then I want to actually hand letter my sentiment. So I'm actually going to write "Run with Patience." This is the King James version of this, but in ESV, this verse says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us." Like I said, King James Version says to lay aside every weight and the sin that so easily besets us and run with patience. And so that's what I'm actually going to letter on here. And I just decided, I do this quite a bit to myself, that I'm just going to start writing without actually practicing it or writing it out in pencil, which probably would have been a better idea. But it's okay. I really enjoy having my handwriting, not because it's so good, but just because it's personal in my pages. And so I just think that it's just a good reminder that, there was a lesson in this page for me, and that's the whole reason that I'm working on it, because, sometimes we get weary, or I do. And it's important to just remember that we have to endure to the end, and we have to run with patience, and just, keep fighting the good fight. So That was kind of what was going on in my mind while I was working on this page. So now I'm adhering that label. I did have to move it down that page just a little bit because I didn't want to cover up those numbers that I had stamped there. But I really like how that looks over there. It says important on it. And then you can see I have book page on the back of this. That was because that paper that I stamped that ledger paper on originally was so super thin. I needed this to have a little bit more body to it because of how textured the background is of this. And so I'm going to glue this page to the craft cardstock. And like I said, I distressed that. I tore some of the edges. I inked it up with that same archival ink. And now I'm adding a bunch of glue to that as well. And then hold that down for a second. And I did highlight the part that says, well, in this instance, it says run with endurance, but because that's the part that I'm focusing on. I'm just going to hold that down for a second. And then I did come in and create a little bit of a drop shadow with a light tan Tombow marker. It's hard to see on camera. And sometimes I'll do the drop shadow in like a really light gray, which also it's kind of the same. You know, it's kind of hard to see on camera, but it's there. I know it's there anyway. So it just makes me feel better, I guess. And then I also brought in a white gel pen and just add a little bit of highlighting to the letters as well, just for some interest there. I'm just keeping the rest of this page super, super simple. So that's basically it for me. So if you liked this video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. All my links, including my affiliate link for Creative Worship Stamps, are down in the description. I'd love to have you join my Facebook group and check out my website. And until next time, friends, bye.